Well, it's so good to see you today. I haven't introduced myself yet, so my name's Chris. I'm one of the pastors here. I want to let you in on my life a little bit of my life before I was a pastor. Before I was a pastor, I had the privilege of working with people with disabilities. And some of the things that I would do working with people with disabilities was we would teach them how to socialize in the community, or how to pay for their food, or just even simple things like that. Or it could be life skills like training them how to cook. And I remember one of the people that I work with. He was such a kind person, such a loving person, and one of the things he loved to do, just like little kids do, he loved to pretend to be movie characters. Okay, so remember that little piece. He loved to pretend to be movie characters he saw. Well, one time he had to go to the hospital. Probably a wrong time to pretend to be a movie character, right? He had to go to the hospital, and the staff was trying to ask him who he was because they needed to know who his parents was so that they could release him. But he gets into pretend mode, and they don't know that, and he pretends to be a movie character, and he says, "My name is Lawrence Talbot." And they're like, okay, Lawrence Talbot, and they try to look that up. They're like, there's no Lawrence Talbot in the system. So you can see the confusion. They don't know how, they can't release him, and his parents need to come get him. "My name is Lawrence Talbot." And again, he was a movie character. Do any of you know who Lawrence Talbot was?
The Wolfman.
Yes, nobody in first service knew. Hey, put up the picture. There was a guy named Lon Chaney. I'm so shocked because first service just looked at me. I'm like, come on, play along, people, right? But it was played by Lon Chaney Jr., and the movie in 1941 was The Wolfman, okay? So now you can see why they were really, really confused, and it caused some commotion and some chaos and confusion. It's pretty safe to say that his parents after that probably had to teach him, hey, there's some situations where you can't pretend. You need to learn how to speak who you are. Now, I know that Josh was pretending, but just like it was important for Josh to realize who he was, guys, it's so important for us to know who we are and live who we are. Do you know why? Pastor Julian started this conversation last week. You know why that's so important? Because there's so many, as he said, there's so many outward pressures that can cause us to miss out on being ourselves. And today, I want to talk with you about how our internal struggles can cause us to miss out on becoming who we are. Now, sometimes it's both and, meaning that we can be affected internally by outward pressures that we're either currently facing or that we have faced from our past, right? Maybe some of you have a lot of pressure at work right now, and it's causing you to have that internal struggle with yourself. Or kind of like Pastor Julian shared last week. He talked about a person that had some outward pressures from someone, and they realized that a decade later they were still trying to please that person, even though that person had died. And so sometimes outward pressure can cause internal struggles within us. Sometimes, though, our internal struggles simply come from us. Maybe we have an insecurity that gets the best of us. Maybe we don't like something about ourselves. Maybe we don't view ourselves accurately. Maybe we're worried or afraid about something that causes us to not be who we are. Guys, I want, whether you're watching online or you're outside or you're in this room, every single one of us face internal struggles. All of us do. That can be very normal. But here's the key. If we listen to them, they can keep us farther and farther away from who we are meant to be. But thankfully, as we slow down and as we connect with God, He can help us overcome our internal voices, our internal struggles, and we can become the person we were meant to be. And so today, we're going to take a look at one of the stories about Moses. Guys, I love this story. It's my favorite story about Moses, and it's one of my favorite in the Bible because it's very, very personal for me. I have faced similar things in my life like Moses does in this story, and I'm wondering if maybe you're going to find out that, wow, I'm kind of like Moses too. So one day, Moses was connecting with God, and he shared with Moses that he wanted him to lead his people. God's people were being oppressed and were slaves, and he reveals that Moses is to lead his people away from being held hostage and to be guided into freedom. Man, what an awesome thing! What an incredible opportunity that God is giving Moses to be one of the people that guides and leads his people to freedom. His people have been in slavery for literally hundreds of years, and God's giving Moses the opportunity to lead the people into freedom. That's not how Moses looked at it, though. Let's look at how Moses responded to God. And in Exodus 3, it says this, "But Moses said to God, 'Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh?'" Me? Come on, God. You joking? "And bring the Israelites out of Egypt." Do you see Moses' internal struggle? He questions who he is. It's a question of his identity. Who am I? It's a question that we often ask ourselves. Just to put in context who Moses was a little bit, Moses was adopted, and there's nothing wrong with being adopted, but that could have messed with his identity a little bit. Moses killed someone. That could have definitely messed with his identity. He was so afraid about being caught of killing someone that he was a man on the run. He ran away, and so he runs into the desert for decades because he's so afraid of the consequences of what if they catch me, what if they catch me. So he's a man on the run, and on top of that, while he's out in the desert, he goes from being in a position of prominence pretty much in the sense of he was adopted into royalty, and now he's a shepherd. Nothing wrong with being a shepherd, but in that society, it was literally the lowest of the low. So it's very easy to see why Moses could have said to God, "Who am I? Who am I to do what you're asking me to do? Who am I to lead your people? You've got the wrong person. Talk to someone else." Let's see what God's response to Moses is. God simply says this, "I will be with you." You know, God's response is interesting. He could have said, "You can do this," and left it at that. Instead, God tells him that he'd be with Moses. Listen in, this is very important for each and every one of us. God was letting Moses know who he could be with God on his side. He was letting him know, hey, Moses, you may be questioning who you are, but this is who you are with me by your side. Guys, in the journey toward being the unique people God has made us to be, we need help to see beyond the limited view that we have of ourselves. Because just like Moses, we have insecurities too. Who am I? Who am I? Some of us might be like, man, with the family that I came from, who am I? Man, with the mistakes that I've made, in fact, my past still haunts me. Who am I, God? Or God, I have a nothing job, or I wish I had a better job. Literally, you could put like 9,000 examples in there, and there's things that affect us internally and gnaw at our insecurities about who we are. But let's even say this. Even when we think good things about ourselves, it's not a complete picture. Another part of the picture is who we can be with God right by our side. God sees that person. Susan, God sees that person. He sees that person. Nalu, God sees that person. Rod, God sees that person. The one that says, you know what? I'm going to step beyond my insecurities because God is by my side. Now, just to be clear, God is always by our side. It's more about us remembering that he's by our side. Because so often the question is asked, who am I? Who am I? I can't do this. But when we remember that he's near, those insecurities can be washed away. And our confidence, our very identity, can be found in who he is and the truth that he's near. Like, wow, you're like literally like, seriously, guys, like Jesus is on stage with me right now. Like Jesus is with you in the seats right now. It's not some weird mumbo jumbo. He's an alive God that's with us. He's by our side, walking with us. But what do? We go internal. Who am I? Who am I? I encourage you to give this a try. Next time you start hearing those insecure thoughts or that inner critic or inner voice starts to attack those insecurities, take a moment to connect with God, silence yourself just like we did for a couple minutes in this service, and whisper something like this to him. God, you are with me. God, here's some of my insecurities. Be specific with them. Like, I'm insecure about this. I'm kind of wondering who I am here. I have an outward pressure here at work. And these are my insecurities. But God, even with my insecurities, you can help me be the unique person you made me to be. And as you do, hopefully that inner critic will be quieted, and you can believe just like the writer of Romans did. You want to put up that verse, Adam, when it says in Romans 8, what then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? I actually like it, I love it in another translation as well. It's in the CEV version, and it says this, what can we say about all this? If God is where? Where? Out there somewhere? Praying to a God out there? God is on our side. Can anyone be against us? Can our inner critic even be against us? God is on our side. I want you to say it personally. God is near me. Say it. Say it again. God is really near you, guys. That's the truth. Now, I get that doesn't always fix everything. You know why? Because every day brings a new inner critic, right? You know what I mean by that one, right? But let's take another look at Moses. Because even though God promised that he'd be with him, it wasn't enough. But good news, Moses and God kept connecting with each other, so let's take a look. In Exodus 4, it says this, Moses answered, well, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Do you see one of Moses' other internal struggles? He started playing the what if game. He allowed his worries and fears to block his vision of who he could become and who he was uniquely meant to be. Now, I want to balance this out for a moment. Asking what if doesn't always have to be destructive. If asking what if helps us be prepared and come up with a strategy, asking what if can be very helpful. But if playing the what if game feeds our fears and stops us from becoming who we were meant to be, that can be destructive. Because when that happens, We can base our decisions off of our worries, and we get farther and farther away from who we were meant to be. Inner critic coming out again, right? Man, what if I can't even live up to my own expectations? Or what if someone disagrees with me? I really care about what this person thinks. And we can all try to pretend that we have nobody in our life. I don't care about what anyone, come on. All of us has someone in our lives, someone in our lives that we're like, I really care about what this person thinks about me. Or what if this blows up in my face? Do you see what's happening here? These worries and fears blocking Moses, his vision of who he could be. I've shared this story a while back, but I thought it was such a good time to bring it up. Guys, for like a year and a half, when God said, Chris, this is who you're going to be. You're going to be a pastor. For a year and a half, I really struggled with that internally. Just to try to help you get, there were times, I didn't have a speaking engagement yet. I wasn't a pastor yet. There were literally times where I'd wake up in a certain morning worried about my future, knowing that God called me to be a pastor someday. It was really, really bad. The worries and fears that were blocking my vision and of what it would be like to be a pastor and God calling me to be a pastor. And some of them were really serious, and then some of them were really silly. I'm gonna share. Some of them were what if I forget? I get up here and it's guys, I don't know what to say next. I've heard this really good thing that when you forget what to say next, you repeat yourself and walk to your notes. I'll repeat. I've heard there's this really good thing that when you forget what you're about to say, you walk to your notes. What if I forget what I'm supposed to say and I just freeze? Or even more serious, what if I say something wrong? Or what if I say something that's not accurate? Or silly things what if I pass out? Or again, silly things what if I burp and they hear it? Seriously, all these silly and serious things were messing with my heart and all these worries and fears. But here's what I want you to see. Even though I didn't see it, God knew the person I could become as he helped me overcome my worries and fears. He saw me up here today, even when my worries back then were getting the best of me. Seriously, my fears ran deep. When your fears have to run deep when you're not even a pastor yet, but you're waking up just a random morning worried about it. They were deep. And maybe your worries are doing the same to you. You may even wonder, maybe he can free you, PK, from your worries, but not mine. They're too big. They're too deep. If that's you, can I say, if you knew me before the stage, if you really knew the internal battle and the inner critic that was raging inside of me for a year and a half, that would probably convince you that he could free you as well. And that he could free you to become the person that you were meant to be as well. See, we've talked about this quite a bit in this series, so I'm not going to talk about it a lot, but I want to remind you, as you slow down, as you connect with God, as you trust him, he really can free you from your worries so that he can free you to become the person you're supposed to be. Now, Even though God gave Moses to his what-if game, God gave Moses solutions. Okay, here's what you're going to do if this happens, and here's what you're going to do if that happens. But that still wasn't enough for Moses. Question, does Moses remind you of anyone? Maybe ourselves, right? Right? But again, good news. Moses and God kept connecting. It wasn't over. So let's take a look. In Exodus 4, Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." Do you see one of Moses' other internal struggles? I can't do this. My weaknesses won't allow it. My weaknesses will not allow it. Now, does it surprise you that God has a response? Because he does. And look what he says to Moses. The very next verse, it says this. The Lord said to him, "Hey, Moses, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and teach you what to say." Now, I want to walk a tightrope for a moment. I do believe it's very healthy to realize your weaknesses and be realistic about who you are. We're not meant to be everything, and we're not meant to do everything. And knowing our strengths and weaknesses can actually give us clarity about who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to do in this world. On the other hand, our weaknesses should never stop us from being who God has made us to be either. God was showing, this is so important. God was showing Moses, he was really showing him who he was meant to be, but his weaknesses were convincing him he couldn't be that person. But what was God's response? Hey, I know you have a weakness, so I will help you. Guys, maybe some of you want to write this down, because I think it's so important for all of us. Moses didn't realize who he could become with God's help. Did you hear that? Moses didn't realize who he could become with God's help. He was so focused on the inner critic, the inner voice, the inner struggles, that didn't even cross his mind. Moses only saw his weaknesses. God knew Moses had weaknesses too, but he also saw who Moses could become with God by his side and with God helping him do it. It's the same with us. It's the same with us. Guys, let me put you a little bit more into my story. Before I got called into ministry, I wanted to be a sports announcer. I love sports. I still love sports to this day. That dream died after 3 days when I had to take a public speaking course in college. God, you're calling me, the guy that has this weakness and fear about public speaking, that actually was so terrified and had a weakness in public speaking that he quit a career path after 3 days, and you're calling me to be a pastor? What was I doing? Inner critic, inner voice, inner struggle. You see, I didn't take into account who I could become with God's help. I didn't take that into account. I'm sure most of us are aware of some of our weaknesses. And like I mentioned, sometimes that can bring clarity to who we are. We're not supposed to be embarrassed about our weaknesses. But our weaknesses also don't have to be liabilities that prevent us from being who we were meant to be. I'm not enough, God. You know this. I'm a 1 in this area. I'm a 3 in this area. I barely believe I'm a 10 in anything. I'm not enough. God, I don't have what it takes. What are you doing? You sure about this? God, I struggle way, way too much to become the person I'm supposed to be. God, serious question. Serious question. Have you ever asked yourself this question before? Have you ever considered who you could be with God's help? Have you ever thought about that before? Have you slowed down long enough to connect with God and to actually consider, this is who I could be with God's help? See, guys, this is why it's so important to slow down, because if we don't, the inner voice, it often wins out. But when we slow down long enough to consider that, like, wow, God is actually a mighty God. He's a powerful God. He's a God right by my side. Maybe I really can become someone with his help. Not only that, but he can help you become the best version of yourself. And when I say that, I'm not talking about being perfect. God knew that none of us would be perfect. God knew that all of us would have weaknesses just like Moses did. He's like, I will help you become the best version of yourself. Now, because of Moses's internal struggles, we don't have time to go over it today, because I know you have Thanksgiving plans to prepare for and stuff, and you need to get out of here eventually. Still connect with God this week. Even while it's cooking turkey, you slow down. That thing's going to take hours anyways to cook, so you slow down for at least a couple minutes, okay? But Moses, he protested with God 3 times and pleaded with God twice. Please don't do this. Send someone else. But here's the key. By connecting with God, eventually Moses took his next step into being the person he was meant to be. And just like with Moses, when we connect with God, he can help us be who we're meant to be. And that's part of the reset, right? Connecting with God to know who you are and become who you're supposed to become. Guys, he knows what you're capable of, and he can help you become that. And I also want to say this, connecting with God wasn't a one-time thing for Moses. Throughout his life, if you read the story of Moses, throughout his life, he went to God often, and he wasn't ashamed to do so. There was still times where he's like, God, are you sure? But at least he was taking his internal struggle to God instead of allowing the internal struggle to win. He just took it to God. Okay, something internal is happening again. I'm not going to be ashamed. I'm going to go to God about it. Guys, you have the same opportunity as Moses did. As you connect with God consistently, not legalistically, just consistently, step by step, he can help you become the person you're meant to be as well. And so as we start to close, as Pastor Julie and I have been saying in this message series, these messages are more just starting conversations to where you can go home between you and God and start these conversations with him. Start these conversations with other people in your life. So here's a couple questions maybe you can go before God with this week while you're cooking the turkey and making the pies and all that fun stuff. What can I do this week to remind myself that God is near me? You know, one of the things that, as we've been sharing, we have an Anxious for Nothing group that's meeting on Tuesday evenings at 6:30 p.m. You're more than welcome to be a part of that this week if you'd like. I've heard a rumor there's going to be pies at that group, so hey, you can lie to me. I came for the group, PK. Yeah, right. You came for the pie. It's okay. You can come for the pie too. It's fine. Whatever you're there for, we'd love to have you. But what we learned this week in our group was just something very simple. All of us got out our phones, and some of us just put a reminder in our phone that either in the morning or in the afternoon, we really thought about it. When would we need that reminder the most? And we just put in our phone, and it alerts us, God is near me. Because again, what did I say earlier? It's not that God isn't near us, it's we need the reminder that he's near us. And so it could be, now you do you, it could be a lot of different things. But what is something you can do this week? That was just an example to give you. And how does remembering that truth help to grow in my confidence of who I am? Number 2, what fear or worry does God need to help me overcome so I can be who I'm meant to be and or do what I'm meant to do? And then number 3, is there a weakness that's preventing me from being who I'm supposed to be? We don't ask that to be ashamed or to feel guilty. It's so that we can ask this question: God, help me overcome my weakness so I can be who I'm meant to be. Hey, I just want to take a moment to pray with you about this because this is important stuff. This is like who we are. This is our identity. And so can we bow our heads and close our eyes for a moment? I want to go back to the question that I asked you earlier, as heads bowed, eyes closed. Have you ever considered who you could become with God's help? Man, guys, can I tell you? God knew what he was doing when he created you. And that's just not some fluffy whatever. That's like God took the time when he was, like the Bible verse says, when he was knitting you in your mother's womb. He took the time to give you the gifts, the strengths, and the personality that you have. He was very intentional in how he made you. And he wasn't thinking to himself when he made you, man, I really hope they compare themselves to someone else someday so they think they're crappy. I think what he was hoping for is, thank you, God, for making me who I am. With your help me to live out who I am. With your help me to not be embarrassed of who I am anymore. With your help me not to cave to outward or inward pressures and struggles. Help me to be me. I think that's probably along the lines of what God was thinking when he made you. And you've heard this before, I get it, but he really doesn't make mistakes. There's no accidents with God. He made you just the way you are for a really great reason. Pastor Steve, can you lead us?